The Z3M Coupe, a car built from 1997 to 2002. This particular model is a year 2000 in Boston green. It has 29,000 miles and is equipped with the S52 engine. So in this video, we'll be talking about its development history, some of the engineering that went into this car, and why you should or should not buy a Z3M. So with that, enjoy the video. Inside the Z3, and it's quite frankly nice to be in a car that's Mark-sized, which means I feel like I'm in a goddamn hobbit hole. Actually, the owner of this car is 5'11" and a quarter, and he barely fits. It's actually his largest complaint. I'm 6 foot tall, and my head does touch the ceiling, which definitely limits some of the future buyers of this vehicle. However, the rest of the ergonomics of this cabin are superb. The seats, these two-tone leather seats, are really comfortable. They're heated and endlessly adjustable. They're actually some of my favorite 90s car seats. Pedal box, tremendous, easy to heel toe. The pedals are perfectly placed. Shifter falls right to hand. And the steering wheel is 90s car big, but feels great and it's leather wrapped. All the gauges are analog and very easy to read. And you have some auxiliary gauges here on the center stack that have your oil temp, your volts, and a traditional analog clock. The visibility in this cabin is also superb. There's a ton of glass in this thing, which means there are no blind spots, and it's also a surprisingly practical cabin. The door cards are okay sized, but your hatch is actually fairly large. It's big enough for a weekend getaway or a grocery store trip, not an IKEA run. Now, I get this question asked all the time. Jack, I'm a successful businessman. My cash game is strong, and I have a lot of liquid assets. The car you're reviewing, will it make me money? I'm like, don't worry about it. BMW has you covered with the BMW Business CD player supported by Harman Kardon. And with that said, let's talk about design for a minute before we head to the shop. The Z3 was a retro throwback. Actually, the whole car was. It was meant to compete with things like the Mazda Miata and harken back to British roadsters of yesteryear. And the exterior styling, I will say, is polarizing. I think it has this ugly duckling quality to it, which actually makes it pretty endearing. But the cabin itself, because it's simplistic, everything relies on analog physical switches. Because of that, it's interesting and has aged very, very well. So with that, let's head to the shop.
Hallelujah. Another BMW M car. Aren't we running out of M cars to do?
You know, Mark, we've done almost either 8 or 7 M cars. I'm surprised you haven't died.
I told Jack, I'm like, dude, we need to get some different cars. He's like, oh man, we got just so many BMWs. I'm like, can't we just get a nice Elantra in here that'll take like 2 minutes? This is a unique and strange, one of the strangest M cars they've ever made.
It is probably one of the ugliest M cars ever made, but it has aged.
No, it hasn't aged well.
No,
This is one of those, the longer you look at it, the more cross-eyed you become trying to figure out what the hell this is. And we're going to discuss, again, why this exists, why this came to be what it is as well.
So this car is based on the Z3 Roadster, which was introduced in the late 90s and started production in the early 90s to compete against the Miata. It was very successful for the people who wanted a retro English-style Roadster that
Didn't say Miata, didn't say Mazda. And
it was premium.
Oh yeah, real premium. So what was the problem?
It sucked to drive. So the team of engineers that worked on the Roadster worked after hours in sort of a, now this is an overused term, but a skunk works fashion. It was a passion project of theirs to build a car that drove well. They tried to pick the largest engine they had at the time, which was either the S52 here in the US or a variation of the S3M or whatever the hell it was called in Germany to sell in the European market. And then they tried to build this as cheaply as possible. So it's kind of a Frankenstein car. The front of this vehicle looks similar to an E36. You have McPherson struts in the front, everything's steel. There's a minimal use of aluminum. And in the rear, you have the E30 suspension, which means trailing arms. What's notable up here is you have some M tuning. So they made a regular Z3 Coupe, which didn't have the wider track or the lowered suspension or the specially tuned dampers.
So you got M-specific sway bars, damper tuning, spring rates, control arms. Did they change bushings probably and all that too? So they took a car that was relatively, let's just put it this way, super soft and built at a price point to kind of cater to this market. And then they tried to kind of go back and redesign what they felt it should have been in terms of a performance car.
And they didn't have approval from BMW to do any of this.
Okay.
So this team, after they had designed this car and they used one of their original test mules from the Z3, then approached management and went, what do you think? And they thought, wow, that thing is really ugly. But after some back and forth, they put it in production. And sadly, it didn't sell.
And now you have an example like this one.
Which is 29,000 miles.
At 29,000 miles. It is as mint as you possibly can get from something of this vintage that has been driven and not just stuffed in a garage. So this is kind of the best of what you're going to see. And probably this has a crazy price tag too.
Yeah. BMWs of this vintage, a lot of people view it as the golden era of BMW, rightly so, I think, because this is the analog era of drivers' cars that they built are now skyrocketing in value, for right or for wrong. And I think as time has passed, clearly, people definitely look at the Z3M with a certain fondness.
In the back, look at this, Jack. Tell me all about it.
So, because this car was built with the principle of saving costs, they went back to the roots with the E30 and they went to a trailing arm rear suspension. However, because this is the M, not the regular coupe, the rear subframe has been strengthened and the trailing arms in the back have done as well. They also have different suspension tuning. On top of that, you have this M-specific rear differential and these ginormous Dynon, basically race cans. They're a catback from Dynon.
Now you can see the flanges, you can see the material is different, but they are enormous. And the build quality is good. I don't know how long this has been on here, because this is not a BMW package, right? This is something you had to go to Dynon directly.
Yeah, what I have to imagine, this was installed in the year 2000 when this car was brand new.
I mean, it looks good. I mean, it's held up very well. Everything else, is... It's indicative of the vintage or the era this was made in. This wasn't something they were going to go back to the drawing board and like, let's redesign a bespoke rear end for this car. It wasn't going to happen. So they took what they had and the best they could to try to tart this up. Because the base car, the Roadster that this is...
was supposed to be cheap and cheerful. And this, well, was not. It was an expensive car. And on top of that, as we both know, this didn't sell. Which means probably in the German fashion, the doctor was shot at dawn.
All right, let's look at the engine bay, Jack.
All right, Mark.
Jack, we got a real looker on our hands here. I'm seeing things that I haven't seen. So tell me about it.
So, Dr. Burkhard Gorschel, when he worked on this car, tried to stuff the largest engine possible into this that they had. And that is in the US, the S52, and in Europe, the S50. We got substantially less horsepower than they did.
Oh, go figure.
Well, so they got about the low 300s from their S50, which had ITBs. This is the S52, which was shared in the US spec E36 M3. So this is really a non-M motor. It doesn't have ITBs. It has some traditional engineering, so those forged internals that they had from the N52, blah, 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 blah. It was good for the lower 200s, I think about 240. But this car has the Dynon Stage 4 package, which we talked about a little bit underneath this vehicle. That means it has its own ECU tuning, a throttle body change, and an air intake, as well as a strut tower brace and the exhaust in the back. And it was supposedly good for in the mid 40 or 50 horsepower range. So this bumps it closer to what we got in Europe. But conversely, because we have the S52, we don't have all of the problems associated with the S50, specifically rod bearings and throttle body issues. We do have some Vanos problems, which is pretty typical in BMWs, and another reliability issue, which is specific to this car and the E30, is issues with the rear subframe due to the trailing arms. They tend to basically fail due to a weld.
Oh.
It's exciting stuff.
I don't see, where's the turbos?
Oh, well, Mark, this is naturally aspirated. It revs to about 7,000 RPM, and it feels pretty good as you're about to feel. And look at this. It has a throttle cable.
Yeah, I saw that over here. Like, this is not my kind of car. I need at least 4 turbos. I need infotainment. This doesn't have that, does it?
Oh yeah, Jack. BMW time, Mark. While it is not fast, it does sound spectacular.
Yeah, it does.
I was like, I don't know.
No, the motor is the star of the show here. I mean, I know this isn't the lust-worthy M engines, but, you know, with the dyno stuff, the intake, I think it's pretty clear that there's something severely missing on a lot of these new cars, and I know we beat this to death now.
And that's induction noise.
When you hear it, I don't even care about exhaust. When you get to the higher RPM, and you said it right when we launched, it's not about the speed, it's about that sound experience. The tonal quality makes you feel like you're in something special.
Yeah, this isn't the most amazing engine I've ever felt. I mean, I do think the S52 is more hated than it should be, but because of the induction note it makes and the fact that you know it's going to be reliable for a BMW motor, there's a lot to like. My one complaint from a drivetrain perspective is the gearing. I know we talked about it a little bit in the shop. BMW, specifically in the S54 cars and this Z3M with the S52, made the gearing longer to slow it down when compared to the E46 M3 and E36. They didn't want their discount sports car to be faster than their real car.
And that makes a lot of sense because, you know, you don't want these competing products with each other, and you see it all the time, and you see it in Porsche. You know, it's something that these companies do because the development advancement that these products go through now, every couple years it gets better and better and better.
So it's all about product planning.
Yep, it is.
Dynamically though, Mark, what does this remind you of?
Well, when I sat in the driver's seat for the first time and took it for a spin, there's two things that came to mind. One, 90s engineering, 90s ride quality. There is a ton of suspension travel. This is a much softer car than you would anticipate. There's a lot more body roll. So in a way, it has this S2000-ish to it, the S2000 feel, but more so an NB Miata.
Yeah, when you start pushing this thing really hard, I think I know why they did it. It's because it's benched sort of up against the Miata, the Z3 was. It definitely feels floaty, and when you're at the limit, the car is a little bit too soft, and because of the the trailing arm rear end, it does definitely want to rotate on you.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a bad thing for a car like this because there's a fun factor to it. I mean, it kind of wants to wash out a little bit in the front first before it goes into an oversteer state. But I think that's exactly what you expect from a car like this of this era. But, you know, in terms of the driver perspective, if you closed your eyes, or I mean, basically if you closed your eyes, you would think it's a Miata until you revved it out. If you put yourself in the driver's seat, covered up the BMW badges, you're like, oh my God, I'm in a kind of like a nicer Miata for sure, like the NB generation. It's because of the glass, it's the door panels, it's the simplicity here that these generation cars were trying to convey. Sports car first, driver's car, kind of like that mentality is all here, and that's what I really like about it, and that's kind of where I'm going to leave it.
Yeah, objectively, we did the Z4M. That is a dramatically better car, but what this does have is that throwback retro feel it's that generation point with cars where they weren't quite modern, right? But they did have some of the creature comforts and reliability, but they weren't so new where they nummified the driving experience. I guess with that, let's head to the final thoughts.
All right. Final thoughts on the Z3 M Coupe. Big thanks to Joe, the owner of this, who also gave us a 997911 to do a video on, and Alex from Glenn Shelley Auto Brokers, who gave Jack a few tips. Now let's get into the pros and the cons. And that is, this is for a specific breed of man or woman. Someone that is a fashionista of BMW M products. Someone that appreciates the clown car aspect of this. It is completely awkward, and over time it hasn't got much better. So you're either going to be a collector or you have some huge affinity to driving this car. As it stands stock, when you drive like the Z4M back to back with this, I would take the Z4M 9 out of 10 times. It's a far superior car. What it lacks is a little bit of personality that's here. It feels definitely way more like a 90s car, and that's some of its draw. On the street, it's pretty soft, it's pretty compliant. The engine isn't pure M of the era, but it's with the dyno stuff that was on here, as you could hear, it's quite a mechanical treat. And again, manual trans and that engine is the highlight. Everything else is just, to me, pretty average. Now, as a collector, this car has about 20-something thousand miles on it, and this would be a good one just to stuff in the garage and maybe just enjoy it on weekends. And that's where I'm gonna leave it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.